orbs, nuts and bolts craft, saucer shapes, black triangles, cylinders, spheres, tic-tacs. Are they just terribly creative? Or should we assume many different types of ETs all studying a tiny little planet in a galaxy far, far away? Hello everyone, Suzanne and John back again with another episode of God and the Paranormal, a podcast exploring high strangeness from a biblical worldview. Thanks for joining us.
If our listeners recall from episode 18, J. Allen Hynek gave us a simple rating system for UFO phenomena,
which interestingly was picked up by Hollywood in 1977.
Yep.
Steven Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind. And by the way, Hynek actually made a cameo appearance in that movie.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. And for those who may not have watched the movie, one of the main characters, Claude Lacombe, was supposed to portray the real-life Jacques Vallée, who was a colleague of Hynek's and had some interesting views of UFO phenomena. Both Vallée and the late Dr. Hynek are major players in UFO last few years and up to the present, too.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a close encounter of the first kind is defined as an observation of a UFO up close and near enough to make out its basic features. A close encounter of the second kind includes some evidence in the environment, such as a track, burn mark, radio static, radar blip, or human symptoms. And according to Hynek's system, a close encounter of the third kind involves witnessing an actual living, quote, non-human intelligence, quote, associated with the UFO.
Yeah, non-human intelligence. NHI, there's a lot of acronyms now that they're using for UFOs, so it's hard to keep up with some of it. But this is the term they're now using for alien or extraterrestrial entities. So let's continue with what we did in episode 18 and just look at the data in more of a documentary style.
And we'll remind listeners again, in upcoming episodes, we'll delve into what might be the true nature of these phenomena. For right now, though, we're simply examining what's been reported in some representative accounts of alleged second kind experiences.
And some of these second kind cases sort of push into the third kind, and that's seeing an alleged occupant of a UFO. We'll save those really deep dive third kind abductions for a later episode.
Okay. Let's start with two of the cases J. Allen Hynek investigated for Project Blue Book.
And in case some listeners aren't familiar with Hynek, he was the lead investigator for Project Blue Book. This was kind of the code name for the Air Force investigation of UFOs from about 1952 until 1969. And Hynek was actually a civilian astronomer appointed by the Air Force. He later admitted that the implied objective was to debunk UFOs as extraterrestrial threats, and the reason was so that we could kind of calm the American public.
Americans were getting a little too concerned about alien invasions after Roswell and other incidents, right?
Yeah, and this first case, Hynek admitted was the most interesting one that he had studied. So let's hear about that.
Okay, here's a synopsis. This was 1964. Socorro, New Mexico policeman Lonnie Zamora was in a high-speed chase with a car when he saw and heard what appeared to be an explosion in the distance. He immediately stopped the pursuit and headed toward the light, thinking that the explosion might be a local dynamite storage building. When he approached the area, he saw what he thought might be an overturned car. Coming closer, Zamora witnessed an egg-shaped object about the size of a car supported by some kind of landing gear. He described it as dull aluminum, not shiny like chrome. He then witnessed two child-sized figures in white jumpsuits walking around the object. Within seconds, a blue flame came from the bottom of the craft, accompanied by a loud roar. The flame intensified as the object lifted off and flew over the horizon.
Yeah, and Zamora immediately radioed for help, they say. When others arrived, they found plant material in the area was burning and still smoking. They also saw heat-fused sand and 4 indentions in the ground, similar to what landing legs might have made.
But only Zamora saw the object, is that right?
Well, there were a couple of other reports of low-flying, unusual craft in the area that day. He was the only one to see the object on the ground anyway.
Okay, so this was a good example of a second kind of event, right?
Yeah, physical evidence in the environment, such as the scorched ground, the landing gear impressions.
And Blue Book investigated it. What did they find?
Well, that's interesting. Several explanations were considered. The first was that it was some kind of test that NASA was doing on its new lunar landing vehicles from New Mexico's White Sand Missile Testing Base. There were tests of several lunar landers there. However, White Sands said that they never would do these tests off base. And even if they did, they weren't vehicles that had the ability to really lift off in Earth gravity and fly like what Zamora saw. And we didn't have the technology then to do something like that.
Okay, and Zamora also claimed the object had a red insignia on the side, right?
Yeah.
It was an inverted V with lines through it and a crescent at the bottom.
Yeah, kind of unusual. And so far, no one has been able to identify that.
Interesting. The other explanation is that the whole thing was a hoax. Is there any validity to that argument?
Well, all kinds of rumors that Zamora just made it up for publicity. He would have had to create a really complex landing area with burn marks and such, which is at least feasible, but others say it was a bunch of college boys pranking Zamora or a group of citizens wanting to increase the tourism in the area.
But there was no real evidence for any of this, though, right?
No, and this brings up a common point from many unexplained sightings that we'll talk about. When considering a hoax, how far would somebody really go to hoax someone? It's easy to say that. Yeah, it's possible to create an elaborate scene to pull a prank off or something, but the more complex the hoax, I think the less likely that someone would do it. So would a group of college kids really make an investment of time and money to do something like that so that Zamora could report it?
Right. And also in Zamora's report, he said he didn't think it was extraterrestrial. That was never his idea. He didn't know what he saw, but he never claimed for it to be non-human intelligence.
Yeah, that's right. He eventually stopped giving interviews and even left the police force because he didn't like the attention and the controversy that he was experiencing.
And another major factor, when Blue Book investigated, they looked at all these claims in depth. Hynek reported to the CIA that he could find no viable explanation for the event.
Yeah, and I think that's important. That was very unusual for Hynek and Blue Book to admit something like this. If anything could be a viable natural explanation, they would have given it for sure.
Here's another case investigated by Blue Book, 12 years prior to the Socorro incident. Here's a summary. Right after dark in Flatwoods, West Virginia, September 1952, brothers Edward and Fred May and their friend Tommy Heiner witnessed a bright object streak across the sky and apparently land on a nearby farm. The boys got Kathleen May, Fred's mother, who accompanied the boys, 3 other people, and a dog to the site. When the group got there, they saw a pulsing red light. They aimed a flashlight in that direction and saw a tall green humanoid figure with glowing eyes and a round red face surrounded by a pointed hood-like shape.
Yeah, this is nightmare material.
For real.
Listeners can Google the Flatwoods monster and actually see what this looks like.
Kind of looks like a monster wearing a skirt, but they said the skirt was actually some kind of metallic cone, 12 feet tall, claw-like arms. Seems more like a robot maybe than a living thing.
Yeah, it does. Also, it was supposedly floating above the ground, and it smelled terrible.
That's interesting.
Yeah. The whole event was just a few seconds, they say. The creature hissed and flew away rapidly, and at that point, they all ran back down the mountain again, so that's about all they saw.
But it was 6 kids, an adult man and a woman, and a dog. There were no other witnesses.
Well, there were a lot of reports of a fiery object over several states around that time, including West Virginia. Most people interpreted it as a meteor. The next day, though, investigators found 2 long skid marks at the site, and the odor was actually still there. So that sort of makes it a second kind of event at any rate. Maybe a third kind if the creature was actually a real thing. But the case is noteworthy, I think, because it got a lot of media attention
Hmm.
for its time. We were in the Cold War, and there had been a lot of other alleged UFO sightings in the 6 years since Roswell. Movies were portraying flying saucers and alien attacks. Life magazine had just run a story about extraterrestrials. And I
Wow.
think the public was kind of primed for this kind of event. And it gives a good example of how Hynek and Project Blue Book were handling these cases. Hynek's explanation was that the fiery light was, in fact, a meteor, which probably didn't crash there in West Virginia.
Okay.
He proposed that the creature they saw was probably a barn owl sitting on a tree stump.
A barn owl sitting on a tree stump.
Yeah. But the
Wow.
witnesses had a response similar to what we hear in so many other UFO accounts. I know what an owl looks like, and this was no owl.
But that was the final word for the investigation, right?
Yeah, yeah. And the boys now in their 70s still hold to what they said at the time. We
Hmm.
saw what we saw, they said, and we don't care what people think.
Okay, well, let's go across the pond for one. The Rendlesham Forest incident, often called the British Roswell. These incidents took place in the Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, England in 1980. The 6 square mile forest lies between two Air Force bases, RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge. At that time, both were being operated by U.S. Air Force and not the UK. This is an excerpt from your book. On the 26th of December, 3 a.m., at the east gate of the RAF Woodbridge base, policemen John Burroughs and Bud Steffens responded to a strange red and blue light descending into the adjacent forest. The initial assumption was that the civilian aircraft had crashed since there were no military operations that night. The two drove toward the scene and noticed an additional white light moving through the forest in a manner uncharacteristic of an aircraft. At this time, they decided to inform the base. Burroughs and Steffens, not wanting to use their unsecured radios, drove back to the gate and used the landline phone. The message was relayed to Flight Chief Staff Sergeant Jim Penniston, who, along with A1C Edward Cabansag, joined the two at the gate. Upon hearing Steffens' comment, "It didn't crash, it landed," Penniston radioed Master Sergeant J.D. Chandler, who contacted other surrounding bases and Heathrow Airport. Radar had indeed detected a contact whose identity is unknown 15 minutes prior to the incident and disappearing near Woodbridge. Penniston, Burroughs, Cabansag, and Chandler drove back into the forest toward the lights to resume the investigation. As they approached the lights, the men reported a static charge on their bodies and the loss of radio communication. At that point, Chandler and Cabansag returned to the vehicle to maintain radio contact with the base. As Penniston and Burroughs came closer, they reported that the lights seemed to, quote, explode silently into a mass of very bright light. After the explosion, a column of light remained over Burroughs as Penniston moved even nearer. He said what had appeared to be a spherical clump of lights was actually a metallic craft of some sort. It was roughly triangular, about 3 meters across and 3 meters high. Blue lights were aligned along the perimeter with a larger white light on top. The craft was completely silent. Penniston moved directly up to the object. He noticed unusual symbols on one side, which he sketched in his notebook. He recounts the event. Quote, "The skin of the craft was smooth to touch, almost like running your hand over glass, void of seams or imperfections until I ran my hands over the symbols. The symbols were nothing like the rest of the craft. They were rough, like running my fingers over sandpaper." End quote.
So in a few minutes, they saw the object begin to rise slowly and silently, then shot away very quickly.
And interestingly enough, Burroughs said that he didn't remember the incident from the time of the light explosion, when he seems to have been knocked unconscious until the object began rising.
Yeah. And also, Chandler and Kammitsag claimed that they lost contact with the other two and the lights during about a 40-minute period.
Wow.
When Penniston and Burroughs finally joined them, they thought they had only been in the forest for a short time, and later they discovered that both their watches were 45 minutes behind.
The ever popular lost time.
Yeah.
We see that often.
Uh-huh. And later investigations found 3 indentions in the frozen ground where the craft was observed, presumably landing leg marks. And there were many broken branches in the path where Penniston and Burroughs witnessed the object navigating.
And their report claims that several rolls of photos were made by different people. but all were found too foggy to be developed by the base dark room workers.
Yeah, they initially thought someone had tampered with the film, and investigators did find significantly high radiation levels at the site, though. Here's another excerpt from the book. Could you read that, please?
Yeah. At 5 a.m., the situation was turned over to Deputy Base Commander Charles Halt. Lieutenant Colonel Halt, described as a stickler for procedure, filed all of the appropriate paperwork regarding the event using the term, quote, unexplained lights. The account becomes even stranger. The next night, Halt and much of the base were at an awards banquet. Reminiscent of the movies, the shift commander located Halt and told him, "It's back." Halt quickly left the function, later explaining that his intent was to settle the UFO distractions and get operations back to normal. Over several minutes, he assembled a small team, including Burroughs, and ordered sets of large gas-powered lighting arrays sent to the forest. The team drove directly to the site of the original sighting without observing anything unusual. As they investigated the area once more, a light appeared in the forest ahead. Halt often used a small pocket recorder. His recorded voice describes a yellow light with pieces falling off. The extremely bright light had a darker center that seemed to blink like an eye. When they were almost underneath, a thin beam of light from the object hit the ground beside them. They watched as the beam seemed to probe the base property. Burroughs later described that as the event ended, the same explosion of light filled the area.
This is one of the most documented cases ever, with tons of supporting paperwork. That audio recording made by Halt is very interesting. I'm going to play a segment of that.
About 4 feet off the ground, about 110 degrees, getting a reading of about 4 clicks. Yes, sir. Yeah, but no, it's dying. No, it's dying. I think it's something other than the ground. I think it's something variable here.
Tree right over.
We just found the first night bird we've seen. We're about 150 or 200 yards from the site. Everything else is just deathly calm. There is no doubt about it. There's some type of strange flashing red light ahead.
It's yellow.
I saw a yellow tinge in it too. Weird. It appears to be maybe moving a little bit this way. Yes, it's brighter than it has been.
Yellow.
It's coming this way.
Also,
it is definitely coming this way. Pieces of it are shooting off. There is no doubt about it. This is weird.
To the left.
Yeah, definitely moving to the left.
Two lights. One light to the front,
Okay.
one light to the left.
Keep the flashlights off. There's something very, very strange. Get the headset on and see if it gets any stronger. Okay. Give us your rundown.
Notation that this is on a beta reading, too.
It's on a beta reading?
Beta
Okay.
still has been removed.
Okay. Pieces are falling off it again.
But it just moved to the right.
Yeah.
Off to the right.
Strange. Oh, we don't want to do the left. Let's approach to the edge of the woods up there. Can you want to do it without lights? Let's do it carefully. Come on. Okay, we're looking at the thing. We're probably about 200 to 300 yards away. It looks like an eye winking at you. It's still moving from side to side. And when you put the star scope on it, it sort of has a hollow center, a dark center. It's like the pupil of an eye looking at you and winking. And the flash is so bright to the star scope that it almost burns your eye. We passed the farmer's house and across into the next field. Now we have multiple sightings of up to 5 lights with a similar shape and all, but they seem to be steady now rather than a pulsating or glow with a red flash. We just crossed the creek, and we're getting what kind of readings now? Getting 3 good clicks on the meter, and we're seeing strange lights in the sky. Some kind of phenomenon. 305 at about 10 degrees. Horizon directly north, we've got 2 strange objects, half-moon shape, dancing about with colored lights on them. About, guessed to be about 5 to 10 miles out, maybe less. The half-moons have now turned into full circles. Because I know there was an eclipse or something there for a minute or two. 0315, now we've got an object about 10 degrees directly south, 10 degrees off the horizon. And the ones in the north are moving, one's moving away from us. Moving out fast.
This one on the right's heading away, too.
Yeah, we're both heading north. So here he comes from the south. He's coming toward us now. Now we're observing what appears to be a beam coming down to the ground. This is unreal. 330, or 0330, and the objects are still in the sky, although the one to the south looks like it's losing a little bit of altitude. We're turning around and heading back toward the base. The object The object to the south is still beaming down lights to the ground. 400 hours, one object still hovering over Woodbridge Base at about 5 to 10 degrees off the horizon, still moving erratic and similar lights and beaming down this area.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah, and these were experienced military men, obviously seeing something unexplainable. But I think the skeptics' response also says a lot about the incident. Their explanations seem more contrived than the actual witness testimonies, I think. Some say the men confused a local lighthouse with the object, or it was a prank by some of the airmen, or maybe the British military in the area. Others claim the possibility of some high-tech prototype craft that was being tested there, which doesn't seem to fit the recorded dialogue in any way, I don't think.
And a prototype craft would be inconsistent with the 1980s technology. Some do say that these bases possibly house nuclear devices. Do you think that plays into it?
Well, I think that would go against the prank theory, wouldn't it? You don't joke around at a nuclear missile site, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, for real. And Penniston, one of the main players, isn't convinced of ETs, but still has no good explanations. Here's his quote about the incident. Quote, "My thoughts are simply that 99% of all so-called UFO sightings can be explained by people with a knowledgeable background or aerial training to reporting such things for exactly what they are. This leaves the remaining 1%. It's this percent, I believe, is truly unknown, a conclusion I made after I left the forest that night. This is the very reason I am troubled by the events of December 26, 1980. I left the forest with the 1% factor reigning all over me." That's a powerful quote.
It is. And by the way, Penniston thinks that the craft could have been carrying human time travelers from the future.
Oh.
And that's another speculation you often hear in lieu of the extraterrestrial hypothesis.
Ground marks, radar blips, radiation, radio failure, staticky feelings, the texture of the craft, blurred film, broken limbs.
Yeah, and still no good explanations. Last episode, we discussed the Westall School event in Australia, where hundreds of people witnessed what appeared to be a flying saucer. Let's look at a similar case from 1994. This was in Rua, Zimbabwe in Africa. It's at Ariel School, which was a private Christian elementary school.
Yeah, Ariel School was in an agricultural area. 62 students witnessed the event during a morning recess.
And apparently all the adults were inside in a meeting at this time. When the kids came back in, they were all excitedly talking about a flying saucer that had landed.
Well, here's a little background information. For several days prior to this, there had been a cluster of UFO reports over southern Africa, explained away as meteors or re-entry of pieces of the Cosmos satellite launch. Also, for what it's worth, a trucker in the area had reported alien beings standing beside a highway. Were they trying to get a ride?
I think so. So Americans aren't the only ones seeing UFOs. That's pretty obvious. And I think it's noteworthy that Dr. John Mack himself actually visited the school to interview the students. He was a Pulitzer Prize-winning Harvard psychiatry professor.
Okay, so there's some good credentials there.
Yeah. A few years earlier, he had begun researching UFO abduction cases. So Mack did get fairly consistent information from the students and a lot of drawings. The general story was that several silvery flying saucers were in the sky, and one of them landed in the field adjacent to the school.
And then it edged into a third kind incident. Some of the children claimed they saw figures coming out of the craft.
Yeah, the younger kids were afraid and ran away, but the older ones supposedly went closer to see what was happening. They reported from anywhere from 1 to 4 beings walking around the object. And they said these beings had large eyes and were all dressed in all black. And here's where it gets really good. The creatures communicated telepathically with some of the children.
Oh, mind melding.
Did
they have pointy ears?
I don't know. Anyway, they certainly had plenty to say. Several children report getting environmental messages. The aliens allegedly told them things like this: the world is going to end because people don't take care of the earth, and pollution mustn't be, and humans are putting harm on the earth.
Wow, this brings up a lot of questions, doesn't it?
It does.
Why would aliens come, perhaps billions of miles, to tell a bunch of elementary kids they need to save the planet.
Yeah. Why do alleged ETs typically contact a single obscure person or a small group in a brief surreal event? And it's often in an isolated area.
If I were an ET with an important message, I think I would contact the leader of the free world, or at least the UN General Assembly, or something really big.
Yeah. Or even Fox TV. Why not? Would that be so hard since they've already traveled light years to get here, you think?
No. So it's interesting that these children are now in their 40s
Mm-hmm.
and they still make the same claims about what they saw. Could it have been a hoax?
I wouldn't think the children had the ability to make all of this up so consistently and to not confess for 30 years. If some group had technology like this, why mess with a group of kids?
Some say things like these are a mass hysteria. Do you think that that's a possible answer?
You know, I think the mass hysteria thing is a really misunderstood idea. It doesn't apply to something like this.
Yeah.
I saw a minor example of this once in college, I think. A student in a chemistry lab that I was in said that she was feeling dizzy and that she thought that there were toxic fumes in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And after a while, or other students in the class decided, oh, I think I smell toxic fumes too. And so it kind of spread through the class because one person had the idea. And when other people heard it, they just jumped in and said, oh, yeah, I'm experiencing that too. That's what mass hysteria is like, sort of. I don't think it can explain a large group of people that suddenly and simultaneously experience the same consistent, detailed hallucination. That's not the way it works. And Dr. Mack's conclusion was that there was no reason to disbelieve the students. They did witness something similar to what they claimed, according to him.
Wow.
Okay, let's back up about 4 decades again. According to a lot of ufologists, this next case is one of the most impressive of all. It's in Levelland, Texas, November 1957, near Lubbock on the flat South Texas plains. This one's interesting because of the large number of witnesses involved, I think.
Yeah, here's one of the many sightings. 2 migrant farm workers saw a bright flash to the side of the road. They say their truck engine died and a bright object suddenly ascended with a loud roar and rushing wind. They both got out of the vehicle and it hit the ground. Both reported feeling heat from the object. When it flew away, the truck engine restarted by itself. They reported the incident to the Levelland police, who basically ignored it as a joke.
Then, an hour later, another driver reported a brilliantly lit egg-shaped object, about 200 feet high, they said, and it was blocking the road. He also claimed his vehicle died suddenly. When he got out of his car, the object immediately took off and it went dark. And as it flew away, the man's car restarted and worked normally, just like before.
So these are obviously a second kind event.
Uh-huh.
A few minutes later, a married couple reported a large glowing object flying over them. Their radio and headlights stopped working and then started back as the object left. Altogether, the police received 15 similar reports, including one from the Levelland fire chief.
So again, we have multiple witnesses and very consistent reports.
And this craft was somewhat different than other UFOs in that it was loud and it made a big wind. Would the military or some other group have a vehicle like this?
Well, once again, we have to think this is 1957, a huge glowing object. If you say this could be some humongous helicopter or a vertical takeoff vehicle like a Harrier, you have to deal with the size of this thing. And reports agree that it was huge, oval shaped, and over 100 feet tall.
Wow.
So if it was a balloon or a blimp, you couldn't just have that fast flying motion that the witnesses observed. You also have to account for some kind of really powerful EMF transmitter that could actually jam radios and motors at a distance. So all of this is on the edge of feasibility, but again, 1957, no mention of anything like this from the military over the last 70 years. And why would they repeatedly land and take off on a non-military property?
Did the military have an explanation?
Oh, yeah. Blue Book was called in again. The official conclusion was ball lightning from storms in the area.
Ball lightning? That's the best that they could do?
Well, apparently so. It's up there with swamp gas, I think, and the temperature inversions as a kind of a default answer to just about any UAP. But listen to the comment from Hynek after the fact. Quote, I'm not proud today that I hastily concurred in the Air Force's evaluation as ball lightning on the basis of information that an electrical storm had been in progress in the Levelland area at the time. This was shown not to be the case. Observers report overcast and mist, but no lightning. Had I given it any thought whatsoever, I would soon have recognized the absence of any evidence that ball lightning can stop cars and put out headlights.
Wow. So Hynek must have been pretty conflicted with his background in science and the
was, a
demands
lot.
of the military elite.
Yeah. He seems like a very thoughtful, honest guy, I think, from what I read about him. The History Channel should make a series about him.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, they did. Sorry.
Oh.
Let's think about the big picture here. I'm just guessing wildly here, but what if, let's say, Elon Musk's company develops an interstellar craft of some sort, and they give us a way to explore some presumed life on other planets? What would we do you think? I'm thinking one approach might be to simply land in some public area on the alien planet and say, take us to your leader.
Yeah. Or would we secretly observe the beings first to learn things about them?
Yeah, let's go with that. How long would it take to do a good observation of a planet, do you think?
I don't know, months, maybe years?
Yeah, maybe. But our alleged UFO visitors have apparently been watching us big time for, about 70 years? If the plan was to introduce themselves, that seems a bit long, I think.
So maybe they're shy?
And if their objective is to study us secretly, why are they so awkward about it? It seems that if you have technology to do what they do, they should at least be able to fly around without being spotted several million times by several million people, you would think.
Or without crashing so often.
Yeah.
It's almost like they're flirting with us.
Exactly.
Here we are. Oops. Now we're gone. Hey, look at us. But only for a second.
That's exactly right. And as we mentioned earlier, why reveal yourself to a bunch of kids or other people? If you really want to help us with ecology or technology or world peace, can't you develop a more effective strategy of communicating with us? And again, I'm just wildly speculating and basing everything on human logic, but I could be completely wrong about this.
Yeah, and there's also the fact of so many different, completely diverse phenomena. Orbs, nuts and bolts craft, saucer shapes, black triangles, cylinders, spheres, tic-tacs. Are they just terribly creative? Or should we assume many different types of ETs all studying a tiny little planet in a galaxy far, far away?
Are we really that interesting, you think?
I don't know.
The point is, all of these data seem inconsistent with what we might expect. And I admit one more time, I'm using human reasoning here, but that's all I have at the moment. The bottom line is, I believe people are seeing something, but all of these phenomena, every observation, all the events have to fit in a biblical worldview if we accept scriptural truths about it.
And we're slowly edging toward that discussion. Trust us, we'll get there. Before that, though, we'll investigate the darker side of alleged UFOs and ETs. We've seen some mild third-kind incidents, but what exactly happens when ET gets more hostile? Alien abduction reports are increasing. If there's any truth behind these, it's a serious matter and it deserves investigation. Thanks for listening. We're very glad you joined us. If you would like to comment or ask questions, please send us an email at godandtheparanormal@gmail.com. You can also get more information at our website, thinkingaboutthebible.com. And on whatever platform you're listening, please subscribe, hit like, give us a thumbs up, add a comment, and especially hit share and let others know about the podcast. We depend on word of mouth. Please watch out for our next episode, and goodbye for now.